Hello, this is Barrett from the C4 Cyber Club at Cypress College. In this video today, we're going to cover the Ethical Hacking Lab series, Lab 3, Metasploit Framework Fundamentals. So first, let's go over, what is Metasploit? It originally was a completely free, completely open source, and it still is open source, but it was a completely free program back in the day, but it was eventually purchased by Rapid7, um, and now they still have a free version, which actually comes pre-packaged with Kali Linux, which is what we'll be using in this lab. And they do also have pro versions, so lots of different options there. It's essentially an exploitation framework, a tool for developing and executing exploit code against a remote target machine. I highly recommend having a look at the Wikipedia page. It's very informational. Basic steps for exploiting a system. You choose an exploit. There's thousands of exploits available for Windows, Linux, Mac OS X. Second step would be to optionally check whether the intended target system is susceptible to that chosen exploit. And you could also choose a payload. The payload that we'll be using in this lab is a reverse TCP. This is essentially what gets run once the exploit is successful. So in this case, we'll be doing a reverse TPC or a remote shell, which allows us, essentially the victim machine, to communicate back to our machine as a listener. You could also choose encoding techniques. And then, of course, the final step is to execute the exploit. So that's what we'll be looking at in this lab. And so we'll want to start up our Kali machine. And let's go ahead and get to first part. Okay, so there's two ways to launch Kali. You can launch it straight from the dock here. If you had your terminal open, you could also just type in msfconsole. It would launch the same way. Okay, so you notice, let me go ahead and expand this. Notice you get this nice little command line graphical banner. These are randomized at start, and if you'd like to display some more, you could just type in banner. Pretty fun. And the very first thing you can do to get a little bit more familiar with commands is just enter in help. Scroll up a little bit. You see here we have the core commands, and we have some database backend commands. So there are ways that, for example, db-nmap, you can actually run nmap within Metasploit, and it will save all of that information into a database, and then you can use that information and do kind of like auto exploits based on port numbers and all that stuff. But that's not what we're going to be working on today in this lab, but definitely very interesting to know. And now there are times when you also load new modules, and just entering help, you'll find that it lists those modules way up at the top here, even above these core commands. So help is something you can continue to use as you load different modules, and also within Metasploit, you can use general terminal commands. So we could still use ifconfig, for example, and get information about our network adapters, get our IP address. This will often come in handy. You definitely want to know this when you're setting what you'll see come up is called an L host, a listening host. We need to let certain payloads know where to send information back to. So you want to send it back to your IP address. So that's why it's important to know this. And netcat is also available within msfconsole. So netcat is another tool that we will get into in future labs. But essentially, it's a tool to remotely connect to another system if it allows it. So let's give this a try. We're going to try connecting to the OWASP BWA machine at the 68.12 IP address, and let's try that on port 80. Perhaps we've done some Nmap scanning prior to this, and we found that they had port 80 open, and maybe they're running a web server or something. So we're gonna try it out and see what happens here. Okay, so, and in fact, it seems like we connected there. So the cool thing about Metasploit, it's very modular, and you're going to see these terms. View the modules available. So every time you use this, every system you may be involved in doing a penetration test against, it's going to be different. So it's nice that this is broken up into modules so that you can craft unique combinations of exploits, combinations of different payloads each time, depending on the system. So let's go ahead, and I'm not going to do this first show one. I recommend that you do it, but it takes a little moment to load. I'm just going to jump to show exploits. And this actually, I believe, takes a moment. Okay, so you see that it's listed a lot of exploits here. I'm going to scroll way up to the top. Way up to the top. Okay. Okay, and now you see, okay, we ran show exploits here, and you have disclosure date. So this is when the vulnerability was reported and disclosed to the general public. You'll hear terms like 0-day exploit, and that's because it's a vulnerability. It's an exploit that has never technically been disclosed, so nobody knows about it. The software developers don't know about it. They're unable to patch it. But at this point, so this particular exploit was disclosed in 2013. So, that's like 7 years ago. But you'd be surprised how many systems are unpatched or might be running outdated software, outdated OSs, things like that. So some of these things do still apply in certain situations. And that's the big reason why the reconnaissance phase is so important. Running Nmap, running service, the service scan option, finding out what versions they're running. Okay, so let me go back down to the bottom. So those were the exploits, and let's take a look at the payloads I have available. Okay, I'm not going to scroll all the way up to the top because, let's see, for example, okay, yeah, so this reverse HTTP or reverse TCP, this is very similar to what we'll be using in the lab today. But essentially, a reminder, the payloads are what get run upon a successful exploit. Okay, so Metasploit also contains vulnerability scanning modules. So we could load the web application scanner plugin. And because, like I said, we figured out that this is running maybe a web server on port 80, so we could do a little bit of scanning there and see what Metasploit will come up with. All right, so we've loaded the WMAP module, and as I mentioned before, if we get help and scroll up at the top, we now see help commands for WMAP. So we can manage sites, manage targets, display web vulnerabilities, like that would be post scan. We could test targets, see what kind of modules we could run against it. And you could even get more detailed help about a specific command like wmap sites -h for help. And we could see, okay, we can add a site to the list. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to say wmap sites-a. We're going to add http 192.168.68.12, and this is the IP address of the OWASP BWA. And you can always double check that. See, we got the .12 there. Okay, so site created. We could verify that by doing wmap sites-l for list. Okay, we see that that's been input there. And we could load the vulnerabilities using the module Mutilidae. So let's go ahead and add that to this target. 868.12. We can verify that that was also added. Okay, great. So we have that module loaded as well. And let's take a look at the options we have when we run this scan. Okay, so we could do -t here to show enable modules. We could give it a particular regex or regular expressions. We can also launch profile modules from a file, which I believe that's what we're going to do here in a moment. So let's run the test first. You'll see it's testing target, and that's the OWASP BWA site that we had loaded in. It's loading all of the different modules that are available within WMAP. Okay, great. So you see we have a bunch of different modules available, like getting HTTP version, scanning for robots.txt, which could show us some files and locations on the web server that they may not necessarily want people to see. So lots of different options here. And what we'll do, let's take a look at this file that is in the root home folder, and the file is called profile. So this is something that was created prior, that's a part of this lab, but essentially what you could do, you could create your own profile, your own, it could be, the file name could be anything, and just you would include these different module names. So you'll see here that it is pre-made. It has maybe roughly, it might be like 20 or so modules here. So let's go ahead and do wmap run. And remember that -e option allowed us to choose a file path. And we'll go ahead and run that, and it's going to execute all of those modules specifically. Okay, launch complete. It took 9.6 seconds. And this could be a little confusing to look through all that. So we could actually just display the vulnerabilities that it found in a much more simple format. Okay, so not a whole lot, but one thing, you know, this file svn entry found, this could be an issue. A serious leak could give attackers information about hidden files and directories within the web root folder. So that, you know, that's something that an attacker would definitely be looking into a little bit more. So we'll move on to the last part of the lab. And let's say when you were doing your original reconnaissance with like Nmap, and you found out that, oh, they're running the TikiWiki content management software. and we saw that that particular version was outdated and vulnerable. So we want to search within Metasploit specifically for TikiWiki. Okay, so we have a few options here. And in this lab, we're going to try we're going to use the TikiWiki graph formula execute. We're gonna try a PHP code execution. So we can get a little bit more info on that. And here I'll show you a tip. This applies actually to Linux in general. If you start to type out a particular path, you could use the tab key to complete it. So once I type this, you see it actually fills out the rest. So when you're dealing with really long paths like that, it definitely comes in handy. Okay, so this is more detail about this particular exploit. You know, who submitted this exploit, the disclosure date, a rank. You know, this is considered excellent. So it works quite often. I guess that's essentially what it's saying. Tells you the options you have. You know, we'll come to this part where you have to set an rhost, which is the IP address or the target address of your victim. Okay, so the next step is to actually use this. So, and we'll do the same tab work here. Start typing tiki, gr, hit tab, so it completes that. Now when you hit enter, you see that the prompt has changed. We're now in the exploit TikiWiki graph formula exec. We could show options, which is kind of similar to what we viewed in the info. But once again, these are the different options that we have. But we're mainly focusing on the rhost here, and we want to set that to the IP address of the BWA machine. If we typed show options again, we see that that IP address is now within the rhost. And like we talked about earlier, we want to set a payload. So this is what will run when the exploit is successful. We're going to use a reverse TCP. Essentially launches a reverse shell. So it's the BWA machine that will talk to us, essentially. And this is also a good way to bypass firewalls at times, because we don't have to bypass the firewall. In a lot of cases, firewalls don't restrict outbound traffic. You know, they're mostly worried about restricting inbound. So, and in this case with the payload, you see when we type show options, we now have payload options because we added that payload up here. And we need to set this lhost to our IP address. So we'll say set lhost 192.168.9.2, which is the IP of the Kali machine. If you want to verify, just to make sure, show options. So we have the rhost set to the victim machine, the lhost to the attacking machine. All right, now we just do exploit. And we are successful. So when you see this Meterpreter session 1 opened, the exploit was successful. You are currently in a Meterpreter shell. The lab ends here, but I will show you a couple other things. Essentially what happens next when you get to this point. You could type in help, and it gives you these file system commands, and you are essentially within that system. So if I did sysinfo, you see computer OWASP BWA. and we are running on a PHP interpreter shell or session. Get UID. So there's the username of that machine. We could look at their running processes. You see they're running the Apache web server, all kinds of different things. So this is kind of even additional reconnaissance. This is, you can gather so much more information this way. You can also pop a shell here. And if I did pwd present working directory, you see that we are in the TikiWiki folder. Let's see if I went to cd home, list it out. Okay, there's the user folder for home. I could probably make a file, echo hello.txt. Oh, no, couldn't do that. It's okay. But anyways, you could see how dangerous this is, how and this is kind of similar to how malware works too. This reverse TCP, it's commonly the payload that is loaded into malware, so that once it's run on a system, the attacker has all of this kind of backdoor access. So great. Well, that concludes this lab, Lab 3, Metasploit Framework Fundamentals, part of the Ethical Hacking Lab series. Thanks a lot for watching.